now that the hull is nearly complete, I can turn my attention to the mast and the rigging. So let's take a look at the plans. Here on sheet 6, we can see that it shows the mast and the spars. Now those are all 1 inch, 1.5 inch equals 1 foot. So in addition to that on this sheet is all of the hardware that is needed, so the bronze castings. Now, before I can really make the spars and the mast, there's lots of parts on here that require the rigging pieces. So what I'm going to do is to cast these pieces in bronze first before I make my mast and spars. And you can see here that these are all in actual size. So basically 1 inch equals 1 inch. So here is the mast partner. This is the mast boom, or the main sheet boom, and so forth and so on. Here's the bow chock that's shown for the starboard side. Then, of course, the port side is reversed. So anyway, you can see all of the pieces are in here, and that I'll be able to make patterns of those in order to cast them in bronze. So what I need to do first is to build a small foundry. And the first part of that foundry is the furnace. Now, a lot of times people will miscall a furnace a foundry. And a foundry is a collection of all of the tools and equipment needed to cast metal. So it would be like calling a stove your kitchen. It is a piece of the kitchen. There's also all different kinds of tools and equipment needed in order to cook. So hence, what we're going to do is to build a furnace for our foundry. So let's get started on building that furnace. So before we get started, I should mention that this video is for entertainment only. Now, casting bronze is a serious endeavor, and I taught bronze casting at the university level for nearly 20 years, and I've been casting bronze for over 40 years. So if you're interested in doing something like this, it is best to have somebody with experience there with you. So with that, let's get started building our furnace. So I started by purchasing the crucible that I would need. Now this crucible is a number 6 8 kilogram crucible. Now the number 6 stands for that it will hold 6 pounds of aluminum and 8 kilograms of bronze. So that translated into pounds is that it'll hold about 17.5 pounds of bronze, which is more than enough. None of the parts that I'll be casting will weigh more than that. So now that we have our crucible, I was able then to figure out what size the furnace needs to be, so I put together a small drawing. The furnace itself is a fairly simple piece of equipment. It basically is a round tube that holds the crucible inside. Now it has a tube that enters in on an angle here, so this is where the burner will come in, and it comes in on an angle so that when the flame comes around there, it creates a Venturi effect around the crucible. And then it can exit through the lid, which will have a small hole in it for the fumes to get out. Now, the tube itself then will be cast with refractory cement. Now, one of the key parts of having an efficient furnace is be able to retain the heat. So what I'm going to do is to use some ceramic fiber, which is a brand name is called Kale Wool, and I'll use a 1 inch lining the walls of it and also across the lid. And then the rest of it will be cast with refractory cement. At the bottom, I'm going to leave a hole so that if for some reason some of the bronze, especially when you're putting scrap in there, it can lay on an angle and melt down, then it can escape out the bottom of the furnace. So you can see here, having had the size of the crucible, I was able to determine that the inside chamber here needs to be 10 inches. And by adding then 2 inches on each side for the refractory and the ceramic fiber, that leaves me a 14-inch outside diameter for the tube. Now for the height, I'm going to make it 12 inches tall. Now I have here just illustrated a couple of little blocks. So essentially what I'll be able to do is to adjust the height of the crucible in there so that it'll melt the most efficiently by putting some fire brick down in the bottom of the furnace. So let me show you some of the materials. So the first thing I needed was some refractory cement. And you can see here I have a bag of refractory cement there on the floor. Now that's 55 pounds, and so that's about 1/3 of a cubic foot once it's mixed up. And I've done the math. I hope that 1/3 of a cubic foot should be plenty to line the inside of the furnace. And I have here some ceramic fiber that is 1 inch thick, and I've got 2 feet by 5 feet, I believe, of the ceramic fiber. I'll of course cut that down, so I should have plenty to line the walls of that and the lid. Now for the actual furnace itself, I have over here, so what I have here is a steel pipe that was actually the base for a sculpture that I had done several years ago. The client wanted a different size base, so anyway, I have this one left over. And it measures exactly 14 inches on the outside. And one of the beautiful things about it is it has this steel plate on the bottom. Now, what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to cut about 2.5 inches off of here for my lid, and then I'm going to go up the probably about 14 inches or so for the bottom. Now, this bottom actually has some holes drilled in it for where it was mounted, so I think I'm going to put some casters on there so that I'll be able to move it around easy. Now for the inside, I have a casting tube here, which is a 10-inch concrete form that I will then put on the inside in order to cast that refractory. So the first order of business is to get the top and the bottom cut off of the steel tube. Well, I've got my pieces all cut down, and I have to admit I'm shocked at how thick the walls are on this pipe. They're nearly 3/8 of an inch. For the purposes that this little furnace is going to produce, that's way overkill. Probably an eighth of an inch would have been plenty. But at any rate, this is what I have, so that's what I'm going to use. So my lid then will fit on here like this. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut a hole in here for the flue vent, and then I'm going to add a handle and some hinges, and also put the hole in the bottom and get some cross members welded in the top to hold the refractory in there. So that's what I'm going to do next. First, I'm going to move the boat out of the way so that I have more room down near my welding station. Well, now that I've got the most part of the furnace made here and got my lid hinged on here, the next thing I need to do is put the inlet pipe in. And we see here on the drawing that this is the inlet pipe that's coming in right here. Now the pipe that I have is 2 3/8 inches in the outside diameter. And because of the extra 3/8 here, I'm going to move over 2.5 inches on this dimension here. So the first thing to do then is to measure from the outside over 2.5. Which you can see I already did that with this mark here. And then that will come and get it parallel to the hinge somewhat, like so. Now, once I've got that marked, then I can come over the 2 3/8 like so. So now that I've got that marked out, I can take my the piece of pipe that I have for that inlet that's going to go on here like that. So I want it to stick out this end about 4 inches or so. So now what I can do is to take a Sharpie marker and I can mark this angle on here. Like that. So now I know that I can cut that off right at that angle. After I got the burner tube fitted, I then found its location and then cut a hole into the wall of the furnace. But before I welded it on, I drilled 3 evenly spaced holes around the outside and tapped that with a 1024 tap. That way I was able to put 3 thumb screws in there that will hold the burner. Now once I got that done, then I got it welded onto the body. After I got all of the welding done, I put some high heat paint over those spots. The other thing that I had done is I added a bracket here to the back so that when I opened up the lid, it would hold and support it like that. So now that we've got all of the welding and parts done, now I'm going to get started doing the lining for the inside. So in order to get started, I'm going to put the bottom in first. I'm going to use these refractory bricks to do that, mainly so that I've got a nice level surface to start with, and also then what I'll do is put a thin layer of refractory cement on top of that to bind them together. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm put the brick in there and then I'm just going to basically generally mark that shape like that, and I'll cut that off and get all of those fitted in. Well, now that I've got all those fitted and bound together, or I should say all fitted, I now need to mix up some refractory cement so they can get all bound together. while the refractory cement is curing on the bottom, I'm going to get the ceramic fiber cut and prepared. So the first thing I want to do is to line the inside of the furnace. So the furnace is 14 inches in diameter. So to find the circumference, which is 2 pi r, so when we multiply all of that out, we come out with just a little under 43 inches. So what I'm going to do is to measure out 44 inches, which should give me plenty of material. And the height of it is 12 inches. So I'll cut a piece 44 by 12 to get started. I've taken the lid off in order to be able to put the refractory cement in there a little easier. And also having it off, putting it on here, I can just push this down, and that's going to mark where I need to cut the a circle for the lid. Well, I've got pretty much all of the forms and the ceramic fiber all situated now. So you can see here in the lid, what I did was I actually doubled it up because there's certainly going to be more heat loss through the top than the sides. And I found an old food container here that I'm going to use as a mold to mold the center of it. And then I welded some rod in here just to help as a reinforcement for the inside of that, to hold the refractory in there. So over here at the main body of the furnace, I have the fiber, the ceramic fiber, lining the outside of it here. And then I took my concrete tube to make the inside form. Now my tube was a 10-inch tube, and I actually needed it to be 9 inches instead of 10 inches because I lost that almost a 3/4 of an inch here. And the actual tube wasn't exactly 10 inches, it was more like 10.5 inches. So what I did was I split the tube down the length of it and then took a section out of there and then wrapped it around. And you can see using a plywood ring here helped to hold that round shape. Now if we look down inside of here, you can see where I took a paper tube and I inserted it through here so that it touches the outside of this round form. The other thing I did was I put a bolt down through that hole, put a toggle bolt through there so that that'll stay nice and sturdy when I'm putting the refractory in there. So the next thing to do is to mix up the refractory cement and get it cast in here. Now the refractory cement, it can only be mixed 13% water to weight of the actual dry mix. So it's very specific, and that's actually a fairly dry material. From what I read, that if you don't stay in that pretty close range, then the refractory will lose its integrity. So anyway, we'll get started mixing it up and get it all cast in here. Well, you can see it's a pretty dry mix. So we'll see how well it goes in there. Well, the next morning I came back and removed all the forms. And having had that main tube split, it came out pretty easily. So now I've got the furnace all put back together with the lid and so forth on it. And so the next thing we're going to turn our attention to is the burner. Now I've elected to purchase a burner as opposed to building one, mainly because I spent maybe about $130 for this burner, which came from Devil's Forge. But it also came with a hose and clamps and a regulator. Now, I could certainly have built one, but when I added up how much the regulator and hose and all of the parts to build one would cost, it was not all that much off of the $130 that I would have purchased, that I purchased this one for. Plus the fact that I know that it's all going to operate properly, all of the fittings is some stainless steel on there, and so forth. So, now that I've got the burner, the way that it goes in there is it slides into the surface like this and put it in so that it just is coming into there. And then I'll tighten down these thumb screws like so. So those thumb screws hold that in there tightly like that. So the next thing then is the crucible. So the crucible will sit right in here, like so. And then the lid comes down. So the next step that we need to do for our foundry is to create some of the foundry tools. Now I actually have a whole bunch of foundry tools, but unfortunately they're for a bigger foundry. So in the next episode, that's what we'll do, is make some tongs and some crucible, a pouring shank for this size of a crucible. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you the next time on The Art of Boat Building.